30 years of war had taught Rillo many things: how to kill efficiently, how to calculate survival odds in seconds, how to watch friends die and continue fighting without pause. But in all those years, across dozens of worlds and hundreds of battles, nobody had ever explained to him why other species spoke of fear as if it mattered. The Vethani did not feel fear. This was simply fact. Rillo's forearms moved with mechanical precision. His compound eyes processed battlefield data faster than most computers. His exoskeleton could withstand impacts that would shatter bone. Fear was for soft species with short lifespans and emotional weaknesses. Or so he had always believed. The briefing room on the Coalition carrier was crowded with soldiers from 9 different species. Rillo stood near the back, observing. His mission was simple: embed with a human fire team and report on their combat methods. Vethani Command wanted data. They wanted to understand why humans, a species barely 2 centuries into space travel, had become the most requested allies in any ground engagement. Rillo had heard the rumors. Humans were unpredictable. Humans were creative. Humans did things that made no tactical sense and somehow survived anyway. He dismissed most of it as exaggeration. Then he saw Fire Team 7. They sat together in the front row, 5 humans clustered close despite plenty of empty seats nearby. They touched each other constantly, a hand on a shoulder, an elbow nudge. One of them was actually sleeping, head resting on another's arm. This was unprofessional. This was inefficient. Sergeant Diana Okonkwo led the team. She was tall for a human female with dark skin and short hair. When she noticed Rillo watching, she smiled and waved him over. Rillo did not understand the gesture but approached anyway. "You must be our Vethani liaison," she said. "Welcome to Fire Team 7. I'm Diana. That's Yusuf on the heavy gun. Annie is our medic, and the sleeping one is Daishi. He'll wake up when shooting starts." "I am Rillo. I have studied your species' military doctrine." "Forget everything you read," said the one called Yusuf. He was large and broad, with a thick beard and a smile that seemed permanent. "We make it up as we go." Rillo did not know if this was a joke. The briefing began. A Coalition admiral explained the situation on Morrow's Rest, a mining colony under attack by the Kreth Dominion. The Kreth were brutal. Expansionists who captured enemy soldiers and transformed them into augmented shock troops called the Hollowed. The Coalition needed to hold 3 fire bases until civilian evacuation was complete. Fire Team 7 was assigned to Firebase Kappa. 72 hours of defense against overwhelming enemy numbers. Rillo calculated the odds immediately. 23% survival probability. 23%, he said out loud. "These numbers are not favorable." Yusuf laughed. "Better odds than poker night." Rillo did not understand poker. After the briefing, the team gathered their equipment. Rillo watched them work. They moved together like a single organism, passing ammunition and checking each other's armor without being asked. The small medic, Annie, noticed a loose strap on Daishi's vest and fixed it while he loaded magazines. "You've worked together long?" Rillo asked. 3 years, Diana said. "Feels like 30. 30 years is the length of my service." "Then we have something in common." They boarded the dropship with 40 other soldiers from various species. Most sat far from the humans. Rillo noticed this and filed it as significant data. During descent, he observed the team more closely. They were not calm. Their heart rates were elevated. Yusuf's hands trembled slightly as he checked his weapon for the 7th time. Annie's breathing was shallow and fast. They were exhibiting stress responses. They were afraid. Yet they functioned anyway. Rillo heard Annie whisper to Diana, "I'm scared." Diana put a hand on her shoulder. "Good, use it." This made no logical sense. Fear was a weakness. Fear caused hesitation, poor decisions, mission failure. Fear was something to eliminate, not embrace. The dropship landed hard. Firebase Kappa was a collection of reinforced buildings on a rocky plateau. The surrounding landscape was dotted with burned vehicles and old craters, evidence of previous fighting. Fire Team 7 moved to their assigned sector. Diana studied the terrain, pointed to positions, gave quiet orders. Her team obeyed without question. "Rillo," she said, "you're with Yusuf on the north wall. Good sight lines but exposed. Can you handle it?" "I am Vethani. Exposure is acceptable." "Good, but if it gets too hot, fall back. No glory deaths. We need everyone alive." Rillo did not understand this either. In Vethani doctrine, acceptable casualties were calculated beforehand. Individual. Survival was secondary to mission success. "Understood," he said anyway. That night they waited. The Kreth were visible on the horizon, thousands of them, a dark mass of soldiers and machines and things that had once been people. Rillo counted them with his compound eyes and ran calculations. 12% now, the numbers kept falling. Yet beside him, Yusuf was humming a song and cleaning his weapon. Annie was telling a story about her sister back home. Daishi was checking his scope with patient care. Diana was walking the perimeter, speaking to each defender personally. They were all afraid. Rillo could see it in their biology, but they acted as if fear was just another piece of equipment to carry. He did not understand, but in 72 hours he would. Dawn came red and angry over Firebase Kappa. Rillo had not slept, but this was normal for Vethani. His species required rest only once every 4 days. What was not normal was how he had spent the night watching humans instead of monitoring enemy positions. They fascinated him. Yusuf had spent 2 hours rigging explosives in patterns that defied everything Rillo had learned about demolition tactics. When asked why, he simply said, "Because the Kreth have studied our manuals too. Time to write new ones." Daishi had chosen a sniper position that seemed poor at first. It did not cover the main approach. Only when Rillo studied the angles did he realize the young soldier had positioned himself to protect retreat routes instead. He was planning for failure before the battle even began. This was strange thinking. Vethani doctrine focused on attack, on victory, on acceptable losses. Humans apparently planned for how to save people when everything went wrong. "Contact," someone shouted from the east wall. Rillo moved to position beside Yusuf. Below the plateau, the Kreth forces had begun their advance. They did not march in formation. They surged forward like a tide, thousands of augmented soldiers and war beasts mixed with the shambling forms of the Hollowed. Rillo counted them, 6,000 against their 200 defenders. "Yusuf," he said, "the mathematical probability of survival has decreased to 8%. Yusuf chambered a round in his heavy weapon. "Then we better make every shot count." The battle began. Rillo had fought in many engagements. He knew combat. He understood violence as mathematics, angles, trajectories, force multiplied by distance. His 4 arms worked independently, 2 holding his rifle, 2 reloading magazines. But fighting beside humans was different. They screamed, they shouted. They called out targets and encouragement and sometimes things that made no sense at all. Diana's voice cut through the noise, calm and clear, directing fire like a conductor leading an orchestra. "North Wall, concentrate fire on the beast handlers. Daishi, take that officer. Annie, we've got wounded at position 4. Rillo watched Diana make decisions in split seconds that would have taken him minutes to calculate. She seemed to operate on something other than logic. Instinct, perhaps, or something deeper. The first wave hit the walls. Kreth soldiers climbed over their own dead to reach the defenders. Rillo killed 17 in close combat, his 4 arms blocking and striking faster than single-limbed species could match. Beside him, Yusuf fired until his barrel glowed red, then switched to a sidearm, then to a knife when that ran dry. And then Diana did something impossible. The Kreth had breached the south wall. Defenders were falling back in disorder. The tactical response was to reinforce the remaining positions and accept the loss of the sector. Diana charged. She gathered 8 soldiers and ran directly into the breach, screaming something in a human language Rillo did not understand. They hit the Kreth line like a fist, driving them back through sheer aggression. It made no tactical sense. The numbers were against them. They should have died in seconds. But the Kreth hesitated. Just for a moment they hesitated in the face of creatures running toward death instead of away from it. And in that moment the line reformed. The breach was sealed. Rillo processed this data and found no logical framework to explain it. By midday, the first assault had been repelled. The plateau was covered with bodies, mostly Kreth, but too many defenders among them. 40 soldiers had fallen. Ammunition was running low. Night would bring another attack. The humans did not rest. They fortified, they treated wounded, they redistributed supplies. Annie moved through the firebase like a ghost, bandaging injuries with hands that never stopped shaking. Rillo watched her treat a wounded alien from a species that had been enemies of humanity just 50 years ago. "Why do you help him?" Rillo asked. "His people killed thousands of yours." Annie did not look up from her. "Work, he's hurt. That's all that matters now." Rillo could not understand this either. That evening, Yusuf found Rillo standing alone at the north wall. The big human sat down beside him and offered a container of water. "Hell of a day," Yusuf said. "I observed you take a severe wound protecting a fallen soldier from another species. He was not human. He was not even from your unit. Why did you risk yourself?" Yusuf shrugged, because he needed help. That is not a logical answer. "Maybe not," Yusuf took a drink. "But when I signed up, they asked me why I wanted to serve. I told them I wanted to protect people. They didn't ask which people, just people." Rillo's compound eyes studied the horizon. The Kreth were massing again, dark shapes in the fading light. Tomorrow would be worse. "The enemy is not attacking at full strength," Rillo said. "They are testing our defenses, measuring our responses." "I figured. Tomorrow they will send everything." Yusuf nodded slowly. "Then I guess we'll have to give them everything back." He smiled. He was afraid. Rillo could see the fear in every biological indicator. But the human sat there anyway, joking, sharing water, treating Rillo like a comrade instead of a foreign observer. These creatures were insane. And somehow, impossibly, Rillo was beginning to appreciate them for it. The second day of fighting brought the Hollowed. Rillo had read about them in intelligence reports. Captured soldiers, surgically modified, their minds erased and replaced with simple commands: kill, advance, die, repeat. The Kreth used them as shock troops, sending waves of former enemies to break defensive lines through sheer horror. Reading about them was different from seeing them. The first wave of Hollowed crested the ridge at noon. They moved wrong, their bodies twisted by crude augmentation, metal plates bolted to flesh and weapons fused to limbs. Some still wore fragments of their original uniforms. Some still had faces that might have belonged to friends or family. And among them were Vethani. Rillo saw his own species walking toward him with dead eyes and mechanical steps. Tall four-armed bodies that had once been proud warriors, now reduced to shambling weapons. He recognized unit markings from a battalion that had been reported lost 3 years ago. Something happened inside his chest. It was not pain, it was not injury. It was something that clenched tight around his hearts and made his vision narrow. His 4 arms, which had moved with perfect precision for 30 years, suddenly felt heavy and slow. He raised his rifle. He aimed at a Hollowed that had once been Vethani. He could not fire. For the first time in 3 decades of combat, Rillo hesitated. A burst of gunfire cut down the Hollowed from his right. Deanna had moved beside him without announcement, her weapon steady, her eyes hard. "I've got you," she said quietly. "Take a moment." She did not mock him. She did not report his failure. She simply covered his position while he stood frozen, watching creatures that wore his people's faces die in the dirt. The battle continued around him like a storm. Rillo heard it distantly, gunfire, explosions, screaming in a dozen languages. The firebase was being overrun section by section. Communications with other positions had gone silent. They were alone. Eventually, his training took over. Rillo began fighting again, but something had changed. Each shot felt different now. Each fallen hollowed felt like a small crack in something he had believed to be unbreakable. By evening, they had held again. Barely. 60 more defenders dead, supplies critical, reinforcements still over 20 hours away. The humans gathered in a bombed-out building that served as their command post. They were exhausted, wounded, covered in dust and blood. Annie was treating injuries with supplies that would not last the night. Daishi had a bandage over one eye. Yusuf moved with a limp he refused to acknowledge. Rillo found Annie alone, restocking her medical kit with hands that trembled visibly. "How do you function?" he asked. She looked up. "What?" "You are afraid, I can see it in your body. Your hands shake, your heart races, your breathing is irregular, yet you continue working. How?" Annie sat back and considered the question. "Fear isn't the problem," she said. "Paralysis is. You can be terrified out of your mind and still move your feet, still do your job. The fear doesn't go away, you just refuse to let it stop you." "This seems inefficient." "Maybe," she smiled weakly, "but it works." Outside, Daishi was preparing for night watch. Rillo watched him climb to his sniper position, a high point that provided excellent sight lines but no cover. If the Kreth spotted him, he would die before he could retreat. "That position is tactically unsound," Rillo told Diana. "He is exposed." "I know he knows too." "Then why does he take it?" Diana looked at him with eyes that seemed very old for a human so young. "Because from up there he can see attacks coming before anyone else. He's not protecting himself. He's protecting us." Rillo processed this. "This is illogical. He is the team's only sniper. His survival should be prioritized." "Tell him that, see what he says." Rillo climbed to Daishi's position. The young human was adjusting his scope, humming softly under his breath. "Your sergeant says you choose this position to protect the team." Daishi nodded without looking up. "The probability of your death here is significantly higher than other positions. Why accept this risk?" Daishi was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "3 months ago, a Kreth sniper killed my spotter, my friend. I was looking the other way, didn't see it coming." He finally looked at Rillo with his one unbandaged eye. "I won't let that happen to them." Before Rillo could respond, muzzle flashes sparked on the ridge. Daishi's rifle cracked once, twice, 3 times. Kreth scouts fell. "They're probing the perimeter," Daishi said calmly. "Go tell Diana." Rillo descended and delivered the report. Diana nodded, gave quiet orders, redistributed defenders. The firebase prepared for another attack. And in the darkness, surrounded by exhausted and wounded soldiers who refused to stop fighting, Rillo felt the thing in his chest tighten again. He was beginning to understand what it was. The humans had a word for it. Fear. Not fear of death. Rillo had faced death countless times without concern. This was something different. This was fear of loss. Fear of watching these strange, illogical, impossibly brave creatures die while he survived. He had not known such fear was possible. Now he could not imagine fighting without it. Night fell on the second day like a coffin lid closing. Rillo stood at the north wall and counted what remained. 63 defenders, barely enough ammunition for one more major engagement, medical supplies nearly gone. Air support was still 16 hours away, and the Kreth were massing for a final push. The numbers said they would all die. Diana gathered the surviving soldiers in the central courtyard. She did not give a speech about glory or duty. She simply told them the truth. Reinforcements would not arrive in time. The enemy had them surrounded. The only thing standing between the Kreth and the civilian evacuation ships was this firebase and the people in it. "I'm not going to order anyone to stay," she said. "There's a service tunnel that leads to the eastern valley. Anyone who wants to take their chances in the wilderness, I won't stop you." Nobody moved. Rillo looked around at the assembled defenders. Humans, yes, but also soldiers from 5 other species. All of them wounded, all of them exhausted, all of them choosing to stand beside humans until the end. Something in his chest ached. "There is one option," Rillo heard himself say. "The Kreth jamming tower to the south. If it is destroyed, we can contact the fleet directly. Request emergency air support." Diana shook her head. "That tower is behind enemy lines. The mission would be suicide." "Yes. Rillo, I can't ask you to do that." "You did not ask. I am volunteering." The words came out before Rillo could calculate why he was saying them. In 30 years of service, he had never volunteered for anything. Vethani took assignments. They followed orders. They did not throw themselves into certain death for species they had known less than 3 days. Yet here he was. Yusuf stepped forward. "I'm going too." "No," Rillo said. "Your heavy weapon is needed here." "Then I'll bring a lighter one." Yusuf's face was set with something that was not quite a smile. "You don't know our demolition codes. You need me." Annie moved beside Yusuf. "You'll need a medic. That tower is 2 kilometers out. Anything happens, you won't make it back without help." Diana looked at them for a long moment. Rillo could see her calculating the same way he calculated, weighing lives against mission success. But there was something else in her eyes too, something that hurt. "Come back," she said. "That's an order." They left through a gap in the southern perimeter, moving low and fast through broken terrain. The Kreth had not fully encircled the firebase yet. There were gaps in their lines, paths through the darkness that a small team could exploit. Rillo led the way. His compound eyes could see in near-total darkness, tracking heat signatures and movement. Yusuf followed, heavy despite his claims of traveling light. Annie moved between them, her medical kit clutched tight to her chest. They made it 1 kilometer before everything went wrong. A Kreth patrol emerged from a crater 20 meters ahead. 6 soldiers, augmented, weapons already raised. Rillo's calculations showed no path to victory. They were outnumbered, outgunned, out of position. Yusuf did not hesitate. He opened fire, shouting something in a human language that sounded like a battle cry and a prayer combined. The Kreth returned fire. The night exploded in light and noise and chaos. Annie fell. Rillo saw it happen in slow motion. A pulse round caught her in the side, spinning her into the dirt. She did not scream. She simply went down and did not get up. Yusuf killed the last Kreth and ran to her. Annie, talk to me." She was breathing, but barely. The wound was bad. In Vethani doctrine, this was simple. She was no longer combat effective. She should be left behind to preserve mission success. Rillo looked at the jamming tower in the distance. He looked at Annie bleeding in the dirt. He looked at Yusuf, who was already lifting her despite his own wounded leg. "Leave her," Rillo said. "The mission is more important." Yusuf stared at him with something that might have been hatred. "Go to hell." "I am stating tactical reality. She will slow us down. The tower must be destroyed. If we fail because we carried wounded, everyone at the firebase dies." "Then everyone dies." Yusuf's voice was flat and hard. "I'm not leaving her." Rillo stood there in the darkness, his 4 arms hanging at his sides, and felt something break inside him. Not break like shattering, break like a shell cracking open. He had spent 30 years following doctrine, 30 years calculating acceptable losses, 30 years believing that emotion was weakness and attachment was inefficiency. But watching this human refuse to abandon his friend, watching him choose loyalty over logic, watching him risk everything for someone who was already lost by any rational measure. Rillo understood something he had never understood before. This was why humans were terrifying. Not because they were strong, not because they were clever, because they cared so much about each other that mathematics simply did not apply. Rillo reached down and lifted Annie with 2 of his arms. "I will carry her, you provide cover." Yusuf looked at him with wet eyes. "Thank you." "Do not thank me, we may all die anyway." "I know, thank you anyway." They moved toward the tower, slower now, burdened, exposed. Behind them the firebase was burning, ahead the enemy waited. And for the first time in his long life, Rilo was truly afraid. Not afraid of death. Afraid of losing them. The jamming. Tower collapsed in a bloom of fire and screaming metal. Yusuf had placed the charges perfectly, bringing down the entire structure in a controlled implosion that sent a pillar of smoke into the night sky. "It's done," Yusuf gasped. "Signal's clear, Diana can call for support." Rilo did not have time to respond. The explosion had drawn every Kreth patrol within 2 kilometers. They were surrounded in a shallow crater, Annie unconscious between them, enemies closing from every direction. Yusuf fired until his weapon clicked empty. Then he drew his sidearm, then his knife. "Rilo," he said, "get Annie out, I'll hold them." "That is not possible. You will die in seconds." "Then make those seconds count." Before Rilo could argue, Yusuf charged. He was limping, bleeding from half a dozen wounds, armed with nothing but a blade against a dozen augmented soldiers. It was the single most tactically stupid thing Rilo had ever witnessed. And it was magnificent. Yusuf lasted longer than Rilo calculated. He lasted long enough for Rilo to lift Annie and move toward the only gap in the enemy line. He lasted until a Kreth blade found his chest and dropped him in the dirt. Rilo stopped. Something happened in his mind. Not calculation, not strategy. Pure burning rage that he had never known he was capable of feeling. The Vethani did not feel rage. The Vethani did not feel anything. He was no longer certain he was Vethani. Rilo set Annie down gently. Then he turned and walked back toward the Kreth. His 4 arms moved independently, 2 holding weapons he had taken from fallen enemies, 2 striking barehanded with the force his exoskeleton could generate. He did not fight with precision. He fought with fury. He fought with desperation. He fought for the human who had refused to leave a wounded comrade and paid for it with his life. The Kreth did not know what to make of a Vethani who screamed. Rilo killed them. He killed them until his weapons broke. He killed them until his arms ached. He killed them until nobody was left standing except himself, surrounded by bodies, covered in blood that was not his own. And then more came. He could see them in the darkness, dozens more, drawn by the noise and the fire. His calculations showed survival probability at less than 1%. He did not care. Rilo positioned himself between the approaching enemy and his fallen companions. Annie was still breathing. Yusuf might be. Alive might not. It did not matter anymore. "You will not have them," Rilo said. He did not know if the Kreth understood his language. He did not care about that either. Gunfire erupted from his left. Diana led the charge, 15 defenders from Firebase Kappa, racing across open ground with weapons blazing. Daishi fired from somewhere in the darkness, each shot claiming a Kreth officer. The enemy line wavered, broke, scattered. Diana reached Rilo and grabbed his arm. "Air support is coming. 10 minutes out, we need to move." "Yusuf is down." She looked past him and saw the big human crumpled in the dirt. Her face went white, then hard. "Daishi, cover, everyone else grab the wounded." They retreated fighting, carrying Yusuf and Annie and 3 other wounded soldiers between them. The Kreth pursued but could not catch them. Daishi's rifle sang again and again, each shot buying seconds. They made it back to Firebase Kappa as the first strike craft screamed overhead. The Kreth assault dissolved under orbital bombardment. Precision strikes turned their positions into craters. Their commanders died. Their reinforcements died. Everything died except the firebase and the exhausted soldiers who had held it for 3 days against impossible odds. Rilo stood on the north wall and watched the fires burn on the horizon. Beside him, Annie was being treated by human medics. Yusuf was in surgery. They said he would survive. They said he was too stubborn to die. Diana found him there as dawn broke. She was wounded. Burns on her arms, a gash across her forehead, probably broken ribs beneath her armor. She stood straight anyway. "You came for us," Rilo said. "You're my team." "I am Vethani. I was assigned as an observer." Diana smiled, and it was tired and bloody and beautiful. You carried our wounded through enemy territory. You fought alone against a dozen soldiers so we could escape. You stood in front of Annie and refused to let them pass. She put a hand on his arm. You're not an observer anymore. Rillo did not know what to say. He felt something wet on his face. It took him a moment to realize his compound eyes were producing moisture. The Vethani did not cry. This was biological fact. Perhaps he was no longer entirely Vethani. You asked me once what I've learned, he said. About humans, about fear. And... Rillo looked at the sunrise. He thought about Yusuf charging into death with a knife. He thought about Annie treating enemies as if they were friends. He thought about Daishi choosing exposure over safety, Diana choosing rescue over retreat, humans choosing each other over survival again and again. I have learned, he said slowly, that fear is not about dying. Fear is about losing what matters, and you are afraid constantly because everything matters to you. He paused. This is why you fight like you do, not despite the fear, because of it. Diana nodded. Took me years to figure that out. You did it in 3 days. I had good teachers. She laughed, then winced and held her ribs. Come on, let's go see if Yusuf is awake yet. He'll want to hear how you saved his life. Rillo followed her. His legs felt strange. His chest felt tight. His eyes were still wet. He had never felt more alive. 1 week after the Battle of Morrow's Rest, Rillo stood in a cold, gray room on a Vethani command ship, facing 3 officers who looked at him like he was malfunctioning equipment. Your report is incomplete, said Commander Thress. We requested tactical data on human combat methods. You have provided only observations about their psychology. Their psychology is their combat method, Rillo said. They cannot be separated. This is unhelpful. We need specific weaknesses, vulnerabilities, something that can be trained into our own soldiers or exploited in future engagements. Rillo thought about Diana leading a charge that should have killed her. He thought about Yusuf refusing to abandon Annie. He thought about Daishi taking the exposed position because someone had to protect the others. There are no weaknesses, he said. Explain. Humans are afraid. They are always afraid. But they fight anyway, not for themselves, but for each other. They make illogical choices because loyalty does not follow equations. They carry wounded through enemy fire because leaving them behind was never an option. Rillo met Commander Thress's eyes. This cannot be replicated. This cannot be trained. This can only be earned. The commander's antennae twitched with displeasure. You spent 3 days with them. Perhaps your judgment has been compromised. Perhaps, or perhaps I have finally learned something worth knowing. The debriefing ended poorly. Rillo was informed that his performance was unsatisfactory, that his emotional contamination was concerning, that he would be reassigned to re-echelon duties while command determined what to do with him. He accepted this without argument. Then he submitted a request for permanent transfer to Coalition Human Forces. Commander Thress called him back to her office. This is a career-ending decision. You understand this? Yes. The Vethani do not serve under alien commanders. It has never been done. Then I will be the first. Why? Rillo considered the question. He had been asking himself the same thing for 7 days. The answer was not logical. The answer could not be expressed in calculations or tactical assessments. Because they showed me what I was missing, he said finally. 30 years of war, and I never understood why we fought. I knew how to kill. I knew how to survive. But I never knew why survival mattered until I found something I was afraid to lose. Commander Thress stared at him for a long time. Then she stamped his transfer request. Go, she said, find what you are looking for. 3 days later, Rillo arrived at a coalition base where Fire Team 7 was stationed for recovery and refit. He carried a single bag of personal equipment. He did not know what to expect. Diana met him at the landing pad. She was still healing, one arm in a sling, but she was smiling. Heard you quit the Vethani military. I requested transfer. Same thing, she gestured toward the barracks. Come on, Yusuf's been asking about you. Annie wants to thank you properly, and Daishi owes you a drink. Rillo followed her through corridors filled with soldiers from a dozen species. Humans moved among them freely, touching shoulders, sharing jokes, treating everyone like family. It was chaotic and inefficient and strangely beautiful. Yusuf was sitting in the common room when they arrived. He had new scars and walked with a permanent limp now, but his smile was the same. Rillo, he stood and did something humans called a hug, wrapping his arms around the Vethani's thorax despite the awkward height difference. You came back. I did not know where else to go. Well, you're home now, Yusuf stepped back and grinned. Welcome to the team. Annie appeared from somewhere and began checking Rillo's old wounds, clucking over his carapace like he was a misbehaving child. Daishi nodded from across the room, which seemed to be his version of emotional expression. Diana watched it all with soft eyes. Scared to join us again? She asked. Rillo thought about the question. He thought about the fear that had grown in his chest over 3 days of impossible battle. He thought about the way it still sat there, tight and uncomfortable, reminding him that he had things to lose now. Yes, he said, I am afraid. And I have learned that fear is not a flaw to be eliminated. It is a gift to be carried. Diana nodded. You'll fit in fine. That night, Fire Team 7 gathered in the common room. They shared food and drinks and stories. Yusuf told an embarrassing tale about his first deployment. Annie argued with Daishi about proper shooting technique. Diana sat quietly and let her team be a team. And Rillo sat among them, surrounded by these strange creatures who had taught him more in 3 days than 30 years of war. He thought about what he would write in his personal log, about what he had learned, about what it meant to fight beside humans. The words came slowly, formed in a language that was not his own, but felt more true than anything he had ever spoken in Vethani. He was Vethani. His people did not feel fear. This was what he had believed for 30 years. He was wrong. He did not feel fear because he had nothing he was afraid to lose. Fighting beside humans taught him what it meant to stand with beings who mattered more than mission parameters, who made illogical choices because loyalty had no equation, who carried wounded strangers through enemy fire because leaving them behind was never an option. Fighting beside humans taught him the meaning of fear. And he was grateful, because now he had something worth being afraid for.